Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure of mine tonight to meet again a gentleman who I have a lot of respect for. He's a pollster. He's a government affairs, public affairs individual. He knows a lot of what's going on in politics. He's someone that really, I think, has got the pulse on what's going on in Canada today. His name is Stephen Adler, and he's got over 2 decades of experience at National Public Relations as the Senior Director of Public Affairs, where he specializes in working with both provincial and municipal governments. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, and it's great to see you again.
It's fun to
you and I have been in some battles over the years together, where I've been on the periphery or you've been on the periphery, and it's great to have a fun chat with an old political guy as well.
Well, don't remind me of the ones I lost. You can only remind me of the ones that I won. Okay.
Hey, we're only as good as our last victory, so that's all that really counts.
So tell me what's going on right now. You know, I've read a couple of your posts recently about polling and trends and campaigns. Let's talk about a couple of issues. Let's talk about turnout. Turnout just seems to be a real issue, going down and down and down. What's going on?
So, I study the polls like everyone else, and my clients ask me all the time what's going on. We're seeing reduction in vote federally, provincially, and municipally across the board, across provinces. I think people are getting dissatisfied with the lack of action and the partisan sniping. It wasn't that long ago in the House of Commons in Ottawa where you would have a federal cabinet minister, let's just say is a conservative, and the opposition is the Liberals, to mix it up. And they'd go after each other on the floor of the House of Commons. And then an hour later, you would see them having dinner together at the members' dining room.
And you don't think that happens anymore?
I don't think it happens at all. And I think that is going out into what the general public is seeing. But also, I don't think we're getting great visionaries anymore. There was a time when, and I'm going to use an Ontario example, you may not have liked any of the three, but you could have seen Peterson, Ray, or Davis as a premier. Or you could have seen, Mr. Turner, Mr. Mulroney, or Mr. Broadbent as prime minister. We don't see that. I think we've lost some of the great statespeople out there to attract the votes.
Is that because we've lost the people, or because the leaders don't welcome them in? I had an interesting conversation with a couple of gentlemen that are launching this potentially new political party called Centerized Canadians. And they were saying that our leader-oriented politics are such that we don't have room for the Paul Martin finance ministers, or the Don Mazinkowski finance ministers, or even the Jim Flaherty finance ministers, that the leaders all want all the adulation for themselves. What do you think? Are we less? We talked about what was that Lincoln book about the team of rivals? Barack Obama inviting Hillary Clinton to be his Secretary of State. Do we have leaders that aren't willing to do that anymore?
So I'm not going to say we don't have that. The leaders aren't willing to do that. I think the center is controlling much more. You have, from my viewpoint, a lot less independence with the backbench members. It's all controlled by the center. And this is not a liberal story or a conservative story. We see it across the board. I think that is translating out that the leaders run the show. The leader's office sometimes will run the show, and you stick in the party line and you follow the leader with it. Now, municipal is a totally different animal, and I know we'll get into municipal. Yeah. I think that's one of the problems federally. I think also, it's a 24-hour news cycle. And it used to be, if you made a mistake at noon, you had a couple of hours until the 6 p.m. news or the next day's paper to issue the correction and to correct it. Now, you make a mistake at 12, and at 12:01, it's on social media. I think that's part of the problem as well.
What about candidates? Where do you see Poilievre versus Trudeau? Where do you see Ford versus whoever? Where do you see what's happening municipally? Let's go through them one by one, if you could.
Sure. So I think when we look at federal politics right now, incumbency has an advantage, and it's a double ballot question. The first ballot question is, are you tired of the Liberal government of Canada? You know, while we do polling, I'm not the direct pollster, but I talk with the pollsters all day long. And so the first question is, do you like Prime Minister Trudeau? Is he the right person for the job? Then the second ballot question is, who do you replace him with? And we're not there yet. I mean, I think they're close, but Trudeau's a scrappy campaigner. And Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party have to show that they're a government in waiting and have to show that they are the people's choice and that the people will move their vote. We're not talking 300 ridings in play. We're talking about 40 ridings across Canada that are really in play that need to go from Liberal to Conservative to put the Conservatives in power, or they need to stay Liberal to keep it. But I also don't think people pay attention all the time to politics as much as those of us who live and breathe it. And so, you know, you and I can talk about 10 or 15 issues of importance that the press is writing about, we care about. Not everybody is deeply involved in it. You know, they're worried about their mortgages. Can they buy food at the corner store, at the grocery store because of the skyrocketing costs? And the difficulty that challengers have is getting the attention through to the masses. Turning to provincial politics.
Let's wait on that for a
Yeah,
second.
sure.
Let's stay with federal. So Pierre Poilievre seems to be trying to do that. And you know,
Yeah.
he's almost painting a picture that, you know, it's almost like Make America Great Again. It's like Make Canada Great Again. And you know, I think Canada's a pretty great place, but he's almost creating this picture that Canada's in the doldrums and we've got real problems. Is that resonating with people? What do you think?
So I don't know how much it's resonating with people, but I will say that is a traditional opposition tactic, that we got to get rid of the government of the day to return to or move to something better. Is it resonating? It will resonate as people turn their attention to politics again. But incumbency has an advantage. If you know, food costs are too high, the federal government have mechanisms to reduce taxes, to make things more affordable, to provide grants or tax breaks to people. And so I think Mr. Poilievre is on the right track. I think he is resonating with people who are interested, and his next challenge is to get the 40% who don't vote to come out and vote against the incumbent government and for him.
He seems in the leadership campaign to really have motivated, you know, a whole group of society that were probably supporters of the trucker convoy, were against vaccines, were against the whole COVID, you know, policies and procedures, etc. Some people think so much so that, in fact, the PCP took over the Conservative Party, or at least, you know, a lot of those people came in and became members of the Conservative Party, and that's what got Poilievre elected. Is that long-term a great strategy, or is it only good if we still remember, you know, lockdowns and problems and issues and high inflation and stuff like that?
So I don't know quantifiably how many actual people who were the protesters on the streets of Ottawa became members of the Conservative Party. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and I don't know what percentage they are. I don't think they are as large a group as people think. I'm talking about the protesters. I'm talking about the ones who did the convoy. But I think there was a resonance of anger and frustration at some of the rules. And, you know, I can be with 9 people, but I can't be with 12. The ever-changing rules. I think that a lot of the issues around COVID were actually a communications failure because people saw a discrepancy of rules, and because of that, anger boiled up. I have a young son at home, and I recall at the time while we were preparing in the weeks ahead of going to the hospital for the birth of my son, not knowing, would I be allowed in? Would anybody else be allowed in? Did I need 1 vaccine, 2 shots? Like, what were the rules at the hospital? Because the yardsticks kept changing. And I think that resonated in anger. I don't know how much people are going to remember COVID as a ballot question, if the election is 15 months from today?
I agree.
I think
it's a real problem. Frankly,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that our attitude toward inflation is the same, because I hope inflation's gone by then too.
Exactly. I think the difference is what people might remember is who they were frustrated with.
Okay.
And if the anger stays with the incumbent government, then that could be an issue for the Trudeau Liberals. The other wild card to remember federally is, what does the NDP do? What does Mr. Singh and the NDP do? Because they are holding the balance of power right now. And so what happens, or could something happen to have the NDP pull their support? And if the NDP pulls their support and in a vote of confidence, and we go to the polls, who is prepared for the election? So it's not just anger on the streets, it's who has their game and their machine ready to go at a moment's notice.
Well, and do you have any prospects of doing better than you currently have? And based on what I've seen, and you've published some of them, Singh couldn't do better. He probably would do far worse. And what he would accomplish is probably what Jack Layton accomplished back in whatever the year that was. I have to think about it, 2000 and something or other. Elect a majority Conservative government. That.
And if we look at Ontario, if we look at a year ago's provincial election, insiders and political people saw the support for the premier and saw the groundswell of support, and really didn't think that that he would go down easily, that the Conservatives were as ripe to be turfed out as some social media in silo speakers did. What was surprising provincially was that the Liberal Party didn't rebound to the prominence that we were used to, and that the NDP lost so much ground. I don't think a lot of people saw the Liberal Party having roughly the same numbers, the NDP losing ground in January of last year as we were running up to the provincial election. And so with Mr. Singh and what we're seeing with the NDP, you got to be careful when you defeat a government. You don't always win after you defeat someone else.
Right. But what that sort of does is comes back to our first topic, which is turnout, because the turnout in the last provincial election in Ontario was dismal. What was it, 42% or something like that?
It's about 42%. Yeah.
And the vote that the Liberals got and the Conservatives got, the Liberals and the NDP got, was, about what they got in the prior election in absolute terms. But because turnout went out dramatically, the Conservatives ended up getting this massive majority. I think that what happened is that neither the Liberals or the NDP excited anybody to go out and vote, and all they had was their absolute low base. The people that would always vote either NDP or Liberals that came out, and the only incremental people, and there weren't a lot of them, were the people that came out to vote for the Conservatives. Anyway, we got to take a break for some messages. We're going to be back in just 2 minutes with Steve Adler. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having fun going back and forth with Steve Adler, who is a very smart guy. He's Senior Director of Public Affairs at National Public Relations. He's got really an extremely impressive resume. For the past couple of years, he's been at National Public Relations as a senior director, a manager, etc. Before that, he was a manager of municipal practice at a company by the name of Strategy Corp with someone who I really respected, John Duffy, who was there. He was the Associate Director of Ontario Government Relations at the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs. He was the Director of Political Affairs at the Canadian Jewish Congress. He was the Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs at the UJA Federation of the Greater Toronto Area. He was the Director of Public Policy at the Canadian Jewish Congress. He was a consultant with Alan Bonner Communications Management Inc., and he was a Chief of Staff for the Ontario government for 3 years in the Ontario legislature, to the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, and the chair of the Red Tape Commission. You've really got a fascinating background.
Or I couldn't hold a job. No. You know what? I've been very fortunate to be able to work with a lot of different people, different organizations, and have a lot of fun doing it and see change being made.
You've got a Bachelor of Arts, BA in politics. from Brock University, and also one in political science from Carleton University. How'd you get it? 2 BAs from 2 different places, and then you got a MA in political science from Lehigh University.
So I went to Carleton, and when I was at Carleton, I really piqued my political interest because most people know Jim Watson as the former mayor of Ottawa. Some know that he was a provincial Liberal cabinet minister. I first met Jim Watson when he was a progressive conservative staffer as the director of communications to the Speaker of the House of Commons. And Jim created, with some others, a volunteering on the Hill program if you are in residence at Carleton. And so I got to get the dog tags, and I worked at Parliament Hill for about 3 or 4 different MPs over a couple of years. And then, I graduated from Carleton, but realized I needed the honors part of it because I had the BA, I needed the honors. I went to Brock, and that was a year of provincial election. I did my year at Brock and then became paid staff during the 95 provincial election for a local candidate in St. Catharines. Had an interview for a master's degree at Lehigh, which most people, I'll admit, have not heard of. If you are an NCAA basketball fan, you will know that Lehigh beat Duke about 10 years ago in the first round. But I was really fortunate because when I went to Lehigh, the chair of the now political science department, when I was there, the School of Government, had done his PhD at U of T. And so we started talking, and I ended up being able to design and teach a course on Canadian-American relations for freshmen to seniors. And it was audited once by the president of the Parents Association, former Vice President Dan Quayle.
Oh, really?
And so, yeah, which was really fun talking about Can-Am relations and having a former VP right with you. Then I came back and worked at Queen's Park, and I've just been lucky. Maybe I've been at the right place at the right time, but each thing is a stepping stone for something else.
Steve, I got to ask you, I was, we were just chatting a couple of minutes ago about Pierre Poilievre and how he has potentially been resonating, really calling out a lot of the challenges, whether it be inflation, just inflation, or he's had this big thing on safe injection sites recently, et cetera. I was speaking again with some people from Alberta, and they said that the challenge with the NDP campaign was all they did was point out how crazy they thought the leader, the premier of the province and the leader of the UCP were, rather than presenting a positive alternative of what they actually were going to do. Is that a problem right now? Are we just sort of calling the other guy bad names without putting forward a good point of view?
I think we are, and I think there's a plethora of elections we can turn to and look at. When George Smitherman lost to Rob Ford in the Toronto mayoral election, it seemed that the mayoral election was Mr. Smitherman saying, don't vote for Ford, but not really presenting or articulating or resonating what his platform was. We've seen federally the same thing. I think people are tired of the don't vote for X. They expect a differing politician from a different stripe to say, don't vote for my competition. I think they really want to hear, what are you going to do for me? And I think that could also be leading to the low turnout. People are not being given the vision of the future, and they're tuning out. They're only hearing the negative. Brian, if I walk up and down the street saying, don't vote for Brian, don't vote for Brian, don't vote for Brian, and never say vote for Stephen, people may only remember the name Brian.
That's interesting. And I don't think that in business you do that. You end up sometimes you may talk down your competitor as the Coke and Pepsi taste test or something like that. But the vast majority of the time, you're only talking about why you should buy your product. And so I think that is something different about politics. I'm not sure exactly why, but it seems like people, for some reason, at least the base, resonate with the scare tactics and the negative talk, but it certainly diminishes turnout. There's just no question. And I think that may be one of the main reasons why the Liberals did not win in the last election. I actually thought highly of the Liberal leader in his job as Minister of Transportation, Stephen Del Duca, but I thought his campaign was incredibly poor. And I think the only thing that I remember was the Bucka beer. No, that was the other guy, Bucka Ride Transit that he put forward. There wasn't a lot of positive policy platform differences that were put forward in that election by anyone.
No, you're right. And look, I've known Stephen Del Duca for a long time. He and I sat on a task force in the city of Vaughan to try to raise election turnout. And it was an official city task force where we did it, and I followed his career. What was surprising to me with the last provincial election was not only the lack of vision or alternative, but it seemed that from an outsider looking in, the campaigns were using yesterday's tactics without looking at today's problems, meaning you can't look at how you won in 2003 or 2007 or 2014 if you're the Liberal Party of Ontario and say, oh, it worked then, it's automatically going to work now. You have to connect with the voter. And, Brian, my focus group is I talk to my neighbors. My neighbors are not as political as I am. They have kids in school or they're retired or whatnot.
Whereabouts do you live?
So I live Midtown Toronto. I live in the Annex. And for my block, we have on-street parking. None of us have driveways or garages. And so, when do you talk to a lot of people? When you don't get a spot right in front of your house and you're walking back home from parking a block or so away. And what struck me in the last provincial election was that people didn't know what the other parties were going to do. The people who didn't like Premier Ford, their minds were made up. I live in University of Rosedale riding. Our federal MP is the Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland. Our provincial MPP is Jessica Bell of the NDP. We now have Diane Sachs as our city councillor, but before that it was Mike Layton, and before that it was Joe Cressy. And so because of that, it's a left of center riding and a left of center area.
Like it.
Yeah. And if these people, my neighbors, have their minds made up that they're not going to vote Conservative, they are ripe for the picking to vote Liberal or NDP. And if they didn't really know which way to go because they didn't know which one was better than the other and who to vote for, and I'm generalizing, Brian, I know I'm generalizing, that's really a problem because the target for the opposition is not the people who lean towards the governing party. Your first job is, how can I get the people who don't like the incumbents? And then you work on getting the swing voter who might have voted blue but could be convinced to come back to red.
It's a real issue, though. I live in Mississauga. I live in the riding of Mississauga Lakeshore, and we had a by-election, in a federal by-election this past, just before the new year. And go back to your comment about there's only a couple of ridings that Poilievre needs to win. One of them has to be some of the ridings in Peel in the 905 around Toronto, and Mississauga Lakeshore is probably one of the more conservative ridings in all of Peel, frankly. And I was knocking on doors, and I had a couple of my kids knocking on doors, and the feedback that came back was that people hated viscerally either Trudeau or Poilievre. It was weird. You had some people that really, really didn't like Poilievre, and other people that really didn't like Trudeau. They didn't really know why. From a policy standpoint, they just liked them from a personality or the image that they had, and it was a very visceral reaction. And then the other people just didn't care and didn't want to go out. So turnout wasn't high, and the Conservative leader didn't come to the riding. The candidate was a quality candidate, a former police officer, very law and order oriented, and racialized, and so should have attracted some people, but lost in the most conservative riding in all of Peel, I would argue, other than maybe Caledon, to a Liberal.
Yeah.
Why?
So I think you hit the nail on the head. And I would love to be in the war rooms of the different parties and see how they do this and what they're not doing. You mentioned the visceral hatred to Mr. Trudeau or the visceral hatred to Mr. Poilievre, but it didn't translate into getting off the butts and going to vote.
Right. It's only motivating the base. That's all it is.
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
And frankly, the undecideds, I think, get turned off by the whole thing.
And that's part of the issue. I mean, it's all well and good to knock on 100,000 doors and identify 27,000 supporters in a riding or whatever the numbers are. But what good is your whole campaign if you can't get them to come and vote? And that's what the disconnect is. We have numerous dates of advanced polling. We have a mail-in option. You have election day. Yes, there are instances of elections being on days of observance for many different communities. We've seen it in the Jewish community and other communities. But people, by and large, are not being motivated to come and vote.
No.
And I don't know why, but it reminds me of a lot of the student votes and the youth votes. The youth votes that they run in high schools and whatnot overwhelmingly lean towards the Green Party or the NDP. The student vote, I think, when I saw the Alberta election reports coming through, was overwhelmingly NDP majority government. But we're not seeing that in the, early 20s coming in to vote. And whoever is a party leader or a senior advisor to party leaders, that's the demographic we need to make sure that votes, and we have to talk to them to find out why they're not voting, because in 20 years, if they don't vote today and they don't vote over the next 20 years, we have bigger problems.
But, I think it's also the leader again. I come back to this leader-oriented politics, and I've seen this analysis, you've probably seen it, that would suggest that if the same people came out in the Barack Obama versus John McCain election as came out in the prior election, which I think was Bush, that McCain would have won. But what ended up happening is Barack Obama motivated a lot of younger people and a lot of African-American people, ethnic people, to come out and vote. And that incremental vote won him, a huge election victory. However, that majority, that extra turnout, dissipated every single 2-year time period at subsequent elections, such that Hillary Clinton, when she ran 8 years later, didn't get any of those incremental votes. Just didn't motivate the incremental votes, and the Republican vote continued to go up. And then I saw the analysis as well for the first Justin Trudeau election, which as we all know, Justin Trudeau for most of the election was actually in third place, and ended up winning a majority government. And again, it was a huge increase in the turnout, and particularly with young and ethnic people that came out, maybe because of legalization of marijuana, who knows, but motivated to come out. But that, again, incremental vote dissipated over time. So do we need a new Messiah? Do we need someone exciting, a big leader to motivate people to come out and vote, like Barack Obama or the young Justin Trudeau?
I think we've had them. And I don't put all my weight in one leader. It's the team. And the reason I say that is that every party thinks that they have the greatest and the best, and then something happens, you need the team. I think what we really need to talk about, and we need to follow through with, is there's a huge percentage of the population who don't like the current system. This is not, Brian, this is not for you and I to get into a debate of whether it should be mixed proportional representation, first past the post. But I think part of the problem is we've had politicians elected, and as part of their platform, it's been, we're going to look and change the system. And then it doesn't happen. I think it doesn't happen because why are you going to change what got you elected? And it's a great thing to say in opposition, but we do need to look at things. Maybe it's electronic voting. Maybe it's more frequent voting days. I don't know what it is, because, and the reason I'm saying this is, if we don't figure out how to get people to vote, it doesn't matter how great a leader or potential leader or team it is, it's still not going to motivate them. Well, the Barack Obamas are a once-in-a-generation candidate. And, the right time at the right place. I like to say to people, in February 2008, no one thought that the junior senator from Illinois was going to win the Democratic nomination. The Democratic nomination was going to Hillary Rodham Clinton, and no one thought anything else. She was winning the Democratic nomination. And somewhere along there between, February and the convention, she got challenged really hard in primaries, and she lost. And yes, Barack Obama, great orator, but he was a once in a generation person who motivated the electorate. And you hit the telling point. They couldn't keep it.
They couldn't keep
And
it.
that's really what it is, because at the end of the day, people either have trust for elected officials or they don't.
Well,
And
I
we're
want to come
seeing
back. I
more
want to come
people-
back. I want to come back to the trust issue in a couple of minutes. So let's hold on that, because I think you've got some really interesting points on that. But you know, on this changing of the political system, I think this is really key, and it's probably more profound in people's minds in this current municipal election for Toronto than ever before, when they see 100 people on the ballot and a dog. So let's take a break for some messages, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the current municipal situation as well. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on 2nd and 60. My guest tonight is Stephen Adler. He's the Senior Director of Public Affairs at National Public Relations. He's someone who's been involved in politics and not-for-profit and government affairs for a long period of time. He's got a lot of experience, and he actually taught a course to Dan Quayle, the former Vice President of the United States. Pretty cool. How cool is that? But we were just talking before the break about trust in government, particularly in regards to sort of the structure of the way we vote. There's 100 people, supposedly, or something like that on the ballot, including a dog, for the by-election for the mayor of Toronto. Someone could get elected with like 30 or 20 or whatever percent. I was involved in a campaign that I won't mention. It was who was on the ballot, but the last name was actually the same last name as mine, for a by-election in Mississauga. And there were, my memory, 28 people on the ballot. And the winner got 23% of the vote, and the second place person got 21% of the vote. And there were 320 votes separating the first place person and the second place person. It was like unbelievable, 23 to 21%. And then, and 80% of the vote went to the top 20% of the candidates. So it was the typical 80-20 split. But still, there were 80% of the candidates and 20% of the vote that were all getting in the single digits. And that's probably going to happen in this election. So is this any way to run a government? Is this any way to run a city?
It's the system we have. I mean, look, last November, Toronto had 29% turnout. Period, full stop. It's shocking how low the turnout was when you had school trustee, councillor, and mayor. And yes, there's incumbents, and I understand the incumbency advantage, but we had a shockingly low turnout. I actually like the fact that we have 100 candidates on the ballot. It shows that people are interested in what our cities do, and they're interested and willing to put their name forward. The issue isn't the 100 people on the ballot. The issue is that can we get people to come out and vote? You know, we have a top tier of 6 or 7 candidates. We have a middle tier, and then we have the others. And some of these people are in it knowing they're not going to win. But, you know, maybe they have 1 or 2 good ideas that the rest of us should listen to. But I can't wait to see the ballot. I don't know if the ballot is going to be a piece of paper or like a scroll of parchment with all those names on it. And, you know, there's some funny things on it, too. There are 2 people with the last name Saunders. I hope people know who choose to vote for the former police chief know that the first initial is M for Mark Saunders, and they cast the right ballot, the right person's name.
A Chow and a Cho or something like that as well, are there not?
Correct. And there used to be, when I was much younger, when Prime Minister Turner was Prime Minister, there was John Turner running in Burlington or Oakville, trying to get the name recognition of then Prime Minister Turner, who was running out in BC. I think, though, with the municipal election, look, I don't think any of us or the majority of us anticipated a mayoral by-election in June 2023 from last November.
No.
So let's just start with that. This isn't someone who's resigned to seek another level of government. This isn't, God forbid, a death or something like this. Most of us didn't see it. Let me tell you how my weekend went, then I'll get into the numbers. On the Friday night, my wife and I observed Shabbat, and we had turned off our electronic devices, and my neighbor bangs on the door at about 9:30, 10 o'clock, And we answered, and we thought, God forbid something had happened. There was an issue. Someone had gotten sick or something. And she says to us, did you guys hear? John Tory has resigned. I go to synagogue the next day, and that's all the talk about. John Tory's resigned. What's happening? On the Monday, I was doing a presentation for a client of mine who was having a lobby day at Toronto City Hall. So Saturday night, when I come back online, we had to create a second version of our presentation with a second agenda, and we called it, Friday before 6 o'clock, Friday after 8 o'clock. Why am I saying all this? Because we have the opportunity right now in Toronto for change. I'm not saying left, right, or center. I'm saying to engage the population to see what their vision of the city is for the next couple of years. We have some big problems facing Toronto. We have a fiscal issue. Where's more money coming from? We have, growth issues. We also have municipalities that I think are handling some issues that might be better serviced by the province or the federal government, but the municipality has to service it because if they don't, no one else will. And we have some good candidates out there. But to get back to your opening part before I went off on this diatribe, we need to find a way for each of the candidates to engage the electorate to come out and vote. We could have another 29% turnout. And then the issue in my mind is not that someone has been elected with less than a third of the electors' support. It's that we've had 2 elections in a row with a low turnout. What do we do to rebound?
Yeah, and so I'll give you my point of view. And on April Fool's Day, I actually announced my candidacy for mayor of Toronto. And so I had a strong point of view on a bunch of the policies that I thought should be first and foremost in this election campaign. That said, it was April Fool's Day, and so it didn't go forward after that. But I guess my concern is I think if you only have 30% victory, you win with 30% and or with 29% or 28% turnout, you don't really have a mandate that you can really lead. And the rest of council will know that you don't really have a mandate. And I think, and I worry that people might get that victory just because of name awareness, not because of people actually believing that they've got a right strategy. And as you say, a new choice for the direction of Toronto. If we had political parties, if we had a preferential vote system, if we had a runoff system, if we had only, 5 people running rather than 100 people running, and we could focus on that, because right now it's just too confusing. And yes, you're right that people are probably focusing on that top tier, but still, we're not getting that kind of, I think, attention that we need to get, that we would if we had political parties, or if we would, I believe, if we had either a preferential vote system and or a runoff. Thank you. A runoff.
Yeah.
Runoff situation. That said, I do think there are some big issues. And so let's talk about a few of them if we could. You had.
So just before we go to the big issues, just for a second, it's the system we have.
Yeah.
And municipalities are a creature in Ontario of the Ontario legislature. We could see a change of the voting system. All it would be an amendment to the Municipal Act and the City of Toronto Act. But it is the system. And whoever wins the mayoral election will have been legitimately elected because it's the system we have now. But just before we go to the issues, I think one big thing that your listeners have to understand is municipal politics is not the same as federal or provincial. The prime minister or premier with a majority government, they don't have unlimited powers, but they can whip the vote and get the caucus to support them. And most of the time it happens. And very frequently does a premier or prime minister lose a vote of a government bill at the House of Commons or the Ontario legislature. Municipal politics is different. There are 26 people who sit around that table. They are all independents. And to whoever is successful in about a month will have to work with councillors from the left, the center, and the right, because they need 12 other votes to pass things for the magic number of 13. And so all of the issues are important, and I want to jump into them. But I just want your listeners to understand that it's not the same as running on a platform provincially or federally and lickety split, you then have your throne speech and it happens. There's a lot of legwork that happens at municipal politics, and whoever wins has to understand that system, and it has to work collaboratively with council to get things done.
I agree with you, and I understand that. That said, I think particularly with the strong mayor powers that have been passed recently, it's a little bit better than it has been in the past. And I think there are some little benefits that the mayor has in giving out deputy mayor positions and chairmanship of different committee positions that they didn't have in the past that strengthen their position. Plus, I do think that there is whether or not there's not parties at City Hall, but people know whether you're on the left or on
Right.
the right, and so therefore people do get together because they've got common interest in what people are doing. And I think the vast majority of them, maybe not all, but the vast majority of them are members or are friendly with different political parties, so people know sort of where they sit on the political spectrum. But let's talk about the issues. I think you've got two people at least that are actually talking right now about raising taxes. And arguing that Toronto needs to raise taxes, and are quoting, some of the publications that show that Toronto's property taxes are like half of what the taxes are in the balance of the GTA. And then other people are saying no new taxes, hold the line, read my lips. So what do you think about the future of Toronto's financial situation?
I think, look, Toronto has a big financial hole that they have to dig themselves out of. $1 billion is what needs to be found. Even if you raised taxes only by a percentage point or two, a cost of living increase, let's just use it that way, you're not recovering and finding new money. That's the status quo. And so the question I have to all the candidates has always been not just how much are you going to raise taxes, but how are you going to reallocate money? If we look at transit specifically and the TTC, during COVID, ridership went way down. Obviously, ridership went way down. But a big chunk of the TTC budget comes from the fare box. Now,
The highest in North America or something like that.
Exactly. And look, Brian, if you and I are working from home and we never go out, we may not need to put gas in our cars because we're not going to drive our car. The TTC buses and subways and streetcars kept running, whether there was one person on it or 100 people on it or 1,000 people on it. And so that part of the operating budget had to be made up from somewhere else. And that was the City of Toronto budget. And so, we have a municipal land transfer tax in Toronto. So if you buy a house in Toronto, there's two land transfer taxes you pay. The provincial one that, Ryan, you living in Peel Region would be very well aware of. But then there's the City of Toronto one. As house sales go down, the number of sales go down, there's less revenue coming in from the municipal land transfer tax. And so once again, it's not a solid way to keep funding the city. We need to have a hard look at the City of Toronto finances and programs. And it's always easy to say we're going to cut this program or that program. But what's after that? How do you save tens or hundreds of millions of dollars? And how do you find tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of new revenue annually to keep doing things?
I think the only solution is that property taxes have got to go up to at least the average or the mean or the median of what it is in the GTA. And that's a huge tax increase. And you can't do it in 1 year. You got to do it over time. But I don't think that politicians in Toronto have been honest and adult with their electorate.
So I think part of the problem with the property tax system is it's not an unlimited percentage of money you're bringing in, and it won't solve the entire problem. And I agree with you. I think that going back 20 some odd years, whatever it is, we've used a line of credit without ever helping or thinking that, oh gosh, the line of credit's going to run out. And that's really where we are now. COVID, I think, sped things up, but it wasn't that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, we looked at additional revenue sources. It didn't happen, maybe 8 years ago. We can look at additional revenue sources, but there's only one taxpayer. And so how do we look at these revenue sources and ensure that people don't flee Toronto and flee the GTA to move elsewhere because maybe they're able to work remotely now and not be in the office as much as they were. We literally have to sit down and look at what are the core services that only the city can do. And then we need to look at the shared services, whether it be regionally with other municipalities or with the provincial government and the federal government, to look at who can do what best and how can funding be reallocated.
Yeah, and I don't think that people are fleeing Toronto because of taxes. I think taxes are, as I've argued, already low. People are fleeing because of lack of affordable housing. That's the biggest issue in this election. And I really worry that we haven't paid attention to it as much as we need to. And I do think that the one thing that Premier Ford has gotten very right in the last little while, I believe, and there may be others, but is that municipal governments have been the problem. And it's been NIMBYism and red tape. What were you with the Red Tape Commission? You were the head of the chief of staff of the Red Tape Commission. You could probably quote on this more than anybody, but it's red tape. It's the time to get approval. It's the risk of not getting approval. And it's just lack of supply. And the lack of supply has been caused by municipal governments. And I do think that the people that have argued, and there's a few of them, that the people that were on council and caused the current problem are probably not the right people to figure out the solution.
So I think we also have to look at housing affordability and affordable housing. They've been blended into one issue, and I want to separate them for a second.
Good point.
Affordable housing is using usually a metric rent geared to income or some other to assist people to have housing who couldn't afford, whether it be rent an apartment, rent a house. I think the old model of government running housing doesn't work. And we need to build it.
Did it ever?
I don't think it did. I mean, and look, my partisan stripes are coming up when I say that I think the private sector can do some things better than government. That doesn't mean, though, that government shouldn't have any part of it. You know, I don't want to see slums built and ghettos built, but I love the model we have in other jurisdictions where, you know, you give the developer an extra 5-6 stories. They build rent geared to income units in it, but they're intermixed. So you could be renting at 10,000 a square foot, and someone could be rent geared to income at 1,000 square foot, whatever the rent would be. But there's no difference. We all get the same amenities because we're building a real community. The other issue, though, with housing is that people are not passing the stress test for mortgages, and that the cost of buying is where people are fleeing. I was born and raised in Hamilton. The average cost of a home in Hamilton is much less than the average cost of a home in Toronto. And with extended transit, you can get from Hamilton by train in 45 minutes or so. Well, you know, you live in parts of Toronto, it'll take you 45 minutes to an hour to drive or commute downtown. So that's part of the reason why they're moving out. I think that what we need to see is some vision and visionary movements. You know, how can we build vertical communities? How can we build all-encompassing communities? And to succeed, it's not just the developers versus the planning department versus council. It's Peel region, York region, Durham region, City of Toronto, sitting down together with the developers, with the affordable housing advocates, with the bureaucrats, and with the elected officials, and finding what we need to do. I think the idea of transit-oriented communities is brilliant. It makes total sense that we want to build housing near where transit lines are so people can get to employment. To me, it's a no-brainer with all of that, and let's see how it happens.
I agree. I worry that we are doing some things against that. There are, you know, municipalities that are opposing everything that you've just talked about. And frankly, it's not the 5 regions that you talked about getting together. Regrettably, we're potentially going to break up some of those regions, which is going to make it even more difficult to have that kind of coordination and collaboration that we should be doing. And we're going to be the 3rd largest metropolitan area in all of North America within a couple of years, beating out Chicago, Dallas, Houston, etc., just right behind LA and New York. And I don't think we've got people that really understand that vision and are planning to think about how we're going to have the Greater Toronto and Hamilton maybe area be the 3rd largest metropolitan area in all of North America, and thinking about how we're going to plan that right and collaborate and work together and have the transit system and the housing policies and the parks and the waste and the water and the everything else that will allow that to happen. Anyway, we're going to take a final break and come back. And I want you to address this other issue that you talked about, which is trust, because I think that is a really important issue. And let's use that as our final topic in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. I'm chatting tonight with Stephen Adler. He is a very smart guy, Director of Public Affairs at National Public Relations. I went through his resume, which I could take 5 minutes and go through all over again, but we won't, because, Steve, I wanted to ask you, what's happened to trust in government? It's gone down precipitously, has it not?
I think it has, but I think it's also been because government hasn't listened to the people and provided services that people see or want or hear or feel. And so because of that, I think part of the problem with it really is that people don't see government working for them. They see government talking to them and lecturing. And I think that's where the trust started to fail. We look at Peel Region right now, and there is a movement, there is legislation that's been introduced to divide up Peel Region, Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon. And Brian, you know it a lot better than I do right now. But the devil is in the details. We have to wait for the report to come out that will say how things will happen. And so it is a hot button issue, but people want to feel that they are being listened to, and people want to feel that their opinion matters. And when people don't feel that, they don't trust the people talking to them.
I think this is a really important issue. And I did not support the trucker convoy or the occupation of Ottawa or whatever you want to call it. But there were, based on polls done by smart guys like you or gals, 15 to 20% of Canadians that supported that convoy and that those policy prescriptions, the challenge with mandates, the challenge with vaccines, etc. And I don't think the Prime Minister and I don't think the federal Liberal government sat down and listened to those people, and they treated them sort of the way that Hillary Clinton talked about some people, the deplorables, maybe not using as viscerally negative language, but sort of comparable to that. And everyone deserves to be heard. Everyone deserves to be listened to. I got to tell you a quick story, if I could. In 1976, I was a young Liberal on a young Liberal board, and Pierre Elliott Trudeau Sr. Was going through some tough times in the polls at the time, and he called a whole bunch of people to Ottawa, and he asked to have us talk. And your friend Howard Brown was one of the people that I went up to Ottawa with. And I remember we went in with about 50, 60 people. Every single person had 2 to 5 minutes to talk. And Pierre Trudeau, the Prime Minister of the day, just listened for 3/4 of a day to all these people talk. He sort of did what my favorite president, Bartlett, did, which is sort of, listen them out and just answer every question. At the end of that, he talked for probably about 2 hours until after dinner time, answering every single one of the questions. I don't think we have people today that listen nonstop to what people have got to say and then answer the questions. We just answer with sound bites, and we answer with partisan hack responses.
I think you're bang on. My late father used to say, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. And he was bang on with that. Look, being in government does not mean doing what you want all the time. Those in leadership position, they make tough decisions all day long. And there are policies we like, there's policies that we don't like. But I think it's incumbent upon elected officials to listen to everybody, including those who don't like you, to hear what's going on. You brought up President Bartlett. In one of the debate episodes, Martin Sheen turns to the Republican challenger and says, there it is. There's the 10-word answer my staff has been struggling for all week long. If you can give me the 10 words after this, and then how you're going to do it, I'll drop out of the race. But governing is more than just a slogan. Now, I'm paraphrasing the scene, but that's really what it is. It's listening, it's reacting, and it's showing leadership. You know, Premier Ford during COVID had daily press conferences. You could not accuse the premier from hiding from the people because he was there every day. You may not have liked what he was saying, and a lot of Ontarians didn't, but you couldn't accuse him of hiding from the people of Ontario because he was in front of a podium and talking. And that's part of what we're missing as well. And so whether it be federal, whether it be the new leader of the Liberal Party of Ontario, whether it be the next mayor of Toronto, I hope that our elected officials spend as much time listening to the people who don't like them as to the echo chamber of those who support them, because you don't need to agree, but you have to be civil and you have to have a conversation with everybody.
Stephen Adler for mayor or premier. Sounds good to me. I got to tell you, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you coming on my show and chatting about all these different issues, federal, provincial, and municipal. I used to work with Jim Pattison, and he would add one thing to your father's very famous quote. Not only do we have 2 ears and only one mouth, Jimmy would always tell me, and a mouth that can shut, Brian, a mouth that can shut.
Yeah, look, the key is knowing what not to say as much as what to say.
Stephen Adler, thank you so much. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Hamilton, at www.saga960am.ca. Good night. Thanks, Stephen.